All right, folks, welcome back to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. It is Tuesday. Thanks for joining us. As usual, I am joined by Tim the Source Anderson, and you can follow him over there, folks, at TJ Anderson1. Like to, Tim, give people a little bit of time to get in here.
Sure.
We wanted to start this a little bit early today. So we can give some people some time to hop in. But we're going to go over Wisconsin, the results from the Wisconsin election last night. They had presidential primaries, and they had some a very important Supreme Court race, state Supreme Court race, and some district court races. And we're going to get into that and what that means, if anything, and what we saw from the vote last night. We'll talk also, of course, about the news du jour, coronavirus news du jour. But before we get into my little spiel and monologue, let's talk about the markets today, because we are in the green. Futures looked solid this morning, and when the markets opened, we're up after having a bit of a down day yesterday, and it looks like markets are going to recover. But let's do the update with Tim, and then I'll jump right into Wisconsin, and we'll go from there.
So the markets are on fire this morning, 30 minutes into the trading day. The Dow and the S&P are up 2.5%. The Dow's at 24,000. The S&P is at 2,800. The NASDAQ is at 8450. Big move for the NASDAQ. Amazon's trading at 2,200, a new all-time high. And it looks like some of these other tech names are kind of on the launching pad, so to speak. I think a real definite reaction to the tone of the White House daily briefing last night that went from about 5 o'clock to about 8 o'clock, that they are going to be putting plans in place to get this economy back open, and in conjunction with, all the governors, and clearly some governors from some very key states, economically and population-wise also. It'll be interesting to see how we hold these gains throughout the day, but this is just this move, I think, is going to is blowing some people away this morning. How broad the rally is and how strong the rally is. Only 30 minutes into the day, but it's starting with a very positive tone.
All right, and let me just say, because I didn't do my little intro with PA. Yes, we are going to get into voter analysis. We're going to run a voter analysis in Pennsylvania, which has been highly requested. So just to let everybody know that, we're going to get into that. Back to the market. So before we move on, Tim, so we could, it's early still, of course, but it looks like markets are looking to recoup those gains. Trump yesterday,
recoup the losses from yesterday. We're well above yesterday the Dow was down 350. The Dow right now is up 600.
Right.
The NASDAQ actually eked out a gain late in the day yesterday.
Yeah.
So now this would be the 6th consecutive gain for the NASDAQ. And it's going to, if it holds these gains, show a 20% rally off the lows. All indices will have shown a 20% rally off the lows if we hold these gains throughout the end of the day.
And folks, this is coming off of the best week in decades. So you know what, Tim? Can you remind me to bring up Mark Cuban? All right, and answer the question about Mark Cuban, because what happens is every show somebody asks it, and they've been asking for days, and then because I see it in the beginning and we wind up getting into it, I lose track, and then
sure. I'm going to write it down right now.
Yeah, because I'll forget. I see you, Irish girl. I know, and I'll get to it. And then of course, yes, we are going to do PA, right? So, but back, with the markets, Tim, we're coming off the best last week. Saw the best week in decades as far as gains. So. This is interesting stuff. You brought up the president's press conference yesterday, and
it was
anything like that in your life, right? Of course, they latched on to him saying I have total power, total, control and authority over whether or not to reopen that. Let me just address that because I called some lawyer friends. I meant to send some DMs to Robert Barnes. He would have answered me on this too, but I saw his thoughts on Twitter. Legally, folks, this is an interesting question. I mean, the CDC will put out their guidelines. If, like Tim and I spoke about yesterday, if they don't follow them, they're going to look stupid. But we can already see, especially in the Northeast, where big business does have a lot of power. It doesn't matter whether or not you have an R or a D after your name. The pressure comes down to bear on these people. And in the Northeast, we've already seen Northeastern Democratic governors and one Republican governor, if you want to call him that, in Massachusetts, put together their own task force to reopen the government. So they're on board with that. And we will, like I said, I fully expect some stragglers, Tim, but what we were told yesterday, the consensus seems to be when it comes to Main Street, of course, as it makes sense with the 10th Amendment, all of a sudden the media cares about the 10th Amendment. Now there's such a joke. These people are so transparently corrupt. They are everything about them is a farce, but now all of a sudden they care about the 10th Amendment. When it comes to Main Street, of course, that applies if you're a conservative, then you argue about the 10th Amendment, but the media never does. As liberals, they tend to, care when it benefits them, and that's it. But there are questions of interstate commerce, Tim, where people are not really understand. The president does have a lot more power, but in the end, that's not Trump's style. You know that. I know that. Trump's style is, you want this money? You're going to open up your government. You're going to open up your economy. You're going to let people get back to work. Otherwise, you can say goodbye to this much or that much or this for this or that for that. And that's the end of it. And that's what he'll do. And, so that's why he looked and he said to the reporter for CBS, they're going to listen. They're going to listen because that's how Trump operates. And he helped these failures of state executives, when they were wholly unprepared for this thing. And I've gone over this now ad nauseum. It is the job of a state governor to make sure your healthcare system is prepared for something like this. It was their failure. And he came running to their rescue, wiped their little booties for them, and they're out of the, they're out of the fire pan, out of the hot pan because of that. But anyway, I don't know. So what did you give your
Look, I think
that press conference? That was nothing ever seen anything like that in my life.
People can talk ad nauseum about how the Democrats want to keep the economy shut down as long as possible to hurt Trump, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I realize that's a very, very popular talking point right now. The reality is the states all came into this with budgetary issues.
Right.
They need the money. They need the revenue. They need the sales tax income. They need the business activity. Okay. They can be the most far left socialist governor on the planet. They still need to balance their state budgets. They need the activity.
And they will.
They need the business. They need the commerce. They need the sales taxes. They need people not to default on their property taxes. They need it badly. They're going to open up as fast as they possibly can.
And that's why you'd agree. That's why we're seeing that movement from Northeastern governors before everybody else.
Absolutely, because they don't want to have like one state sort of open up and then another state. Well, we've got this little hot spot over here in this area. Maybe we're not ready yet. It's going to be like, look, we've got plenty of hospital beds. We've got plenty of ventilators. We've got plenty of PPE. We've got plenty of medicine. Okay, let's go. And if anyone missed the first 30 minutes of the press conference yesterday, I highly, highly encourage you to Google it and watch it, because if there is ever a 30-minute infomercial as to why people who had reluctantly voted Republican and supported Republicans for 30 years were so enthusiastic about Donald Trump. It's right there in front of your face. He had clips of everything the media had been saying from 4 to 6 weeks ago and put it right in their mush, played it right on the stage for them. They'd been trying to create this false narrative that him and Tony Fauci are arguing and at odds and at everything, and that Fauci is trying to deep six him, and Fauci is trying to do everything he can to ruin Trump. It's total nonsense. It's a fallacy. It's a made up story. And Fauci basically said to a reporter who asked him in the front row,
That was
"Are
great.
you doing this of your own accord?" And he snapped at her and said, "Don't even imply that."
Yeah, he said,
Don't even go there.
I do nothing.
This guy
without
is
my own-
80
right.
years old. He's not gonna he's not going to do something or say stuff that he doesn't believe in.
So listen, because
Wall
he
Street
said
Journal
it,
has an
though,
editorial today, and they beautifully lay out
So
what
what do you-
Fauci, everything Fauci said over the last few months, including an interview that he was having with Science Magazine. Was it with Science Magazine? Bear with me just 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead. And I'll bring up, while you're looking through that, I'll just bring up that it does appear, because of how he explained his statements that we spoke about yesterday with Jake Tapper, the way he said it, because it's the way the media works. I didn't even mean yesterday.
It's
that
the
he
way CNN
intentionally-
played it. It's
That's
the way
right.
CNN played it.
I didn't
It's
even
not
mean
the
to
way.
imply.
It's not the way he said it. Here's
Yeah.
the other thing that a lot of people don't understand.
Hold on. Let me just say this. I didn't mean to imply that he gave them ammunition on purpose. What I'm saying is the media, unless you give them like children, because they are the maturity level of these people. If you don't know that, look at the press conference yesterday and you will see how immature these people are. And if you don't give them, like little children, exactly what you mean, phrase it, tell them, construct a little box for them. This is where we are in our happy place, and this is what I mean. They will take it and twist it and run with it. So when I said yesterday he gave them the ammunition, Donald Trump does that to himself all the time. My point is that if you're not crystal clear with what you mean with these people, they will take it how they want to take it. And they'll, so it's just the nature of who they are, and what they're trying to do and their agenda, So, I mean, the maturity level yesterday that I talk about all the time, if you didn't see that press conference yesterday, you need to go see it. They reminded me, like I said on Twitter, these people remind me of those nasty kids on the basketball court in the old neighborhood, and they're throwing elbows the whole game. And the minute you put them on their butt, they run home crying to their little mommies because they can't take somebody hitting them back. And they're just little immature, entitled babies who try to play with the big boys, and then they get put on their butt and they run home crying, and they want somebody to intervene and help them and then bandage up their little wounds. They're pathetic. They need to grow up.
So he had an interview on March 22nd with Science Magazine. They asked him, "How are you managing to not get fired?" He answered that the president always listens to his counsel. Then they pressed on and on and on. Fauci finally cut the interview short.
Did he really? Well, now he knows from experience.
This was from March 22nd.
Yeah.
It's from over 3 weeks ago.
Now he knows.
This has been going on. This has been going on the whole time.
Weeks.
It's just a made up false narrative. And the most disturbing thing is that it's got people on Twitter that are supposed to be on our side gaslighting it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say now he knows, though, from experience. So his mistake with Jake Tapper was that he didn't specifically say the very first time Dr. Birx and I walked into the president's office and gave him those recommendations, the president listened. He had to say, so what if you go back and listen to it, and this is the point I was trying to make yesterday. What he said was like it was like a logical statement, Tim. Like, he's a man of science, so he's trying to make sure A and B, he's like following logic. So of course, if in his mind, if you would have taken actions earlier, it would have had an impact. That's all what he was saying. But they took it to mean I must have told that must mean
they didn't take it to mean that they felt they had enough from him to go with the headlines that they wanted to go with.
Right. So they went and they took that, and then they jumped to point B, which with the way they play their little game of telephone, that turned into he must have at some point went in the Oval Office and told Trump to shut it down earlier, but Trump didn't listen. I mean, this now he knows, again, from, like I said, from experience that that he needs to, like, their children.
The other problem that the media has, they are clueless as to what goes on in the business world when people have meetings, what goes on, and certainly in a Trump White House when people have meetings, and how normal it is for there to be disagreements during a meeting while people are exchanging their points of view.
Do you remember?
It's not normal for everyone to, when you have 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 people in a meeting
from different disciplines.
It's not normal for everybody to agree with themselves in any line of business, at any company, at any level, or in any certainly in any Donald Trump White House meeting. It's normal for people to have different points of view. It's even to have heated discussions.
Right.
Okay. And then come out and say, well, okay, this is what we agreed to, and this is what we're doing.
When Barack Obama had Bob Gates, right? He held him over. Where Bob Gates is a Republican. He's a Republican Secretary of Defense, but he stayed under Obama.
Yeah.
He would disagree repeatedly with other cabinet officials. It was like Barack Obama was a genius to have so many diverse opinions around him. But if there's any dissent at all in this White House, which you would expect, and that's something I should address really quickly. If everything was, going along as usual in the White House, the Trump administration, Tim, then people who voted for Donald Trump for change, for real change, and wanted somebody to do something differently in this town should be alarmed. And what I mean by that is, it was very clear in the beginning of Barack Obama's administration that this was going to be a very typical White House, and there was really never any real hope of real change, right? So people who voted, if you voted for Donald Trump because you wanted somebody to come in there and really shake things up and the way things, then there's going to be turmoil. That town, it does not like people interfering with how they do business and how they change things. They don't want things changed. It's a status quo town, and they don't ever want, unless all of the power centers agree to change the status quo for some reason, usually to benefit them, they don't want it changed. So they portray the Trump White House as in complete disarray. And in the beginning, of course, there was, it wasn't a running like a wall.
Every White House is in disarray.
Every White House is like that. Right. And the difference is that you don't typically have holdovers from prior administrations actively trying to sabotage the new administration. Typically, the will of the voter is respected. That did not happen this time around. So, but my point to a Trump voter is, if, because there's a lot of fatigue out there, I would say that you should be concerned if things all of a sudden started to go back to normal, like, the way things typically ran in a White House. That would mean the man is not doing what he promised to do. And that's my point, So here we are. Wow. 20 minutes in, Tim, what were you, do you want to finish your thought though on what you were going to say?
The reason that Trump won, I mean, if you want to talk issues, obviously it was trade and immigration. But the reason so many people voted for him that hadn't voted for a long time, or maybe had never voted, was because of the fact that he fights.
Right.
And if you go all the way back to Bush 41. Okay. Look, did he win? He won election basically because against Mike Dukakis in 88. For all practical purposes, it was Reagan's third term. Okay. He was never a strong political figure. Okay. He was a consensus gatherer. All right. Even if you go back to the first time he ran for president in 1980, how do you, if you're George Herbert Walker Bush, how do you, and you're from, you got your house in Kennebunkport, et cetera, how do you win the Iowa primary in 1980 against Ronald Reagan and then go to New Hampshire right in your own backyard and lose? Because he was just never an aggressive political figure.
Yeah.
You know, and so he ran, you know, when he ran for re-election, he'd been in Washington for forever, really, but he'd been in the either president or vice president for 12 years. It's difficult enough for a political party to win election after they've had someone in the White House for 8 years. It almost never happens. So when you could just see that when he was running against Clinton was this fresh face, coming, you know, out of the governorship from Arkansas, smart guy, ran a good campaign, had really smart people running the campaign with him. I know some people think that the only reason he won was because of Ross Perot. I don't really buy that. I think if Ross Perot had never been in the race, the Clinton team would have ran that campaign a little bit differently. They still would have won. It was, you could just kind of sense that Bush was done.
Well, I would say, you know, because I do, the Ross Perot holds some weight, but here's the thing with some people would say, well, you know, it's definitive that Bush would have won if Ross Perot was in the race. If there was what Tim is talking about was a general dissatisfaction with George W. Bush among voters who typically voted Republican. Read my lips, Tim. Remember, I mean, that is such a huge, I can't, you know, overstate how much of an impact that had. And what I would tell to people, yes, there is a natural wealth of voters out there that should have been Bush voters, but weren't. But why weren't they is the question. And if Ross Perot was why was Ross Perot even in that race is what people should ask themselves when they think like that. There was obviously a need among those voters to have somebody else represent them. All right. And by the way, Ross
why
Perot,
did he get primaried so hard by Pat Buchanan?
Which, by the way,
you know why? Because he fell. He is a guy who had been in Washington his entire life almost.
Yep.
He fell for the oldest trick in the Democrats' book, where they convinced him, raise taxes and we'll give you all these budget cuts later. He raised taxes. They screwed him and never gave him any of the expense cuts that they said they were going to give him later.
And he should have learned that lesson, because Reagan also, by the way, in his second term, fell for something similar like that.
With immigration.
Exactly. Yes. He should have learned his lesson, and he didn't, because Republicans, I mean, there's no other way to put it. They're either stupid or gullible. I mean, that's it.
So let's carry it one step further and go to Clinton's reelection. Here's a guy that was he was not doing well. He was beatable by the right person.
He was beatable by the right person.
In 96, his poll numbers were not good. Okay. And who did the Republicans come up with to run against him? Bob Dole. Look, he's a war hero. I get it. He was next in line. You know, I get it that's the way the Republicans did things in the 90s. He was just not an inspirational candidate by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, you know, I was kind of like, do I really have to vote for this guy? Do I really have to vote for Bob? I would have rather voted for his wife.
A lot of people don't realize, Tim, like what you're saying right now. Bill Clinton won his first election in the 40s. I mean, if you
Yep.
think Donald Trump has a ceiling, go back and look go back and look at Clinton 92, Clinton 96. Even in his reelection effort, he did not do. He never won a majority of the public, Tim.
Right.
And a lot of those and that didn't happen until impeachment.
Yep.
He never had numbers like that. A lot of people don't realize that. And, in those states that Democrats thought they could hold on to when they ran up against Bush v. Gore, some of the southern states, Kentucky, West Virginia, Bill Clinton did very well there. But what people don't seem to understand is that a lot of that vote was split up. And if you thought, Gary Johnson and Jill Stein took a chunk of the vote in 2016, which put, Hillary and Trump, below 50, that was nothing compared to those days.
Right.
And they were polling large chunks, and Bill Clinton was winning states with 41%, 42% of the vote. That's it. So, a lot of people don't realize that. It wasn't until Republicans overreached on immigration coupled with a rockin' economy. I mean, I remember the 90s. It was fun. There was money around. And that's what sent Bill Clinton's poll numbers to the moon. And eventually there did become I think the narrative that Bush used successfully to reinstate integrity to the White House, I think that did absolutely help. But he also didn't do what his father did. And he gave a place for those people who had abandoned his father, years before. And he gave them a home again. And that is why the polls, lots of them, were wrong. And why people who did, it's always funny. Tim, you said it before. It's a rule of thumb. It's very hard for a party to hold on to the presidency for 3 terms. But every time a Democrat's up, all of these historic norms with the election analysis just kind of like fall away. So Hillary Clinton was a favorite. Al Gore was a favorite. And, they only return to those historical rules of thumb when it's a Republican. It's funny. By the way, which is why after we come back from our little spiel and have Tim tell us what the markets are doing before we get into Wisconsin, I want to do a quick 2-minute little talk with viewers and social media followers and readers of PPD. Because when we get into the Wisconsin election analysis, I'm just a brutally honest person, and I'd like to prepare people for that. So here we are. It's 10:27. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. You can follow me right here at _People's Pundit on Twitter, and you could follow Tim. I'm Tim the Source Anderson. I'm joined with at TJ Anderson1. If you guys are watching on Periscope, I can see you're doing it. That's great. Give us hearts and follow the account, whichever one you're looking at it on. It streams on PPD's Periscope and my own. All of these metrics matter, like I said. And if you're following on Facebook, give us those likes. Like the page if you don't already. And then if you're on YouTube, subscribe. Subscriptions are very important. We need about 500 more to hit a milestone, folks. You guys ran that clock up pretty quickly, but we need about 500 more. So like it, share it with your friends, tell them to like it, and also, give us the thumbs up. There's always going to be those trolls, Tim, who come in and thumbs down. Right. It's just the way. Give us those thumbs up and balance that out. And the ultimate way. Oh, and you can on YouTube viewers, if you hit the notification bell, which is the little bell that will tell you when we're about to go live. And from now on, Tim and I spoke about this. We're going to go live about 5 minutes before 10. So about 9:55, the show will go live to give people some time to get that notification. Okay. Because I know you guys get it quick and then race to get on. But the ultimate way to support the show is to subscribe to PPD. So ppdnews.us/subscribe. There are multiple different plans out there, including a credit tier where you don't have to make a commitment. So go ahead and check it out. It's ppdnews.us/subscribe. Let's have Tim tell us a little bit about what the markets are doing with about an hour in. And when we come back, we'll go over, we'll talk about the Wisconsin election results, which will be a great preface for the Pennsylvania voter analysis. What's going on out there, Tim?
The market's just having a very, very strong day, led by the NASDAQ, up over 3%. And really, the NASDAQ is actually right now above its 200-day moving average. It went through that on the way down on March 7th. The 200-day moving average is at just below, right at 8,400. The NASDAQ right now is at 8,460. We'll see if it can hold on to that. That would be a significant marker for the NASDAQ if it can hold on to that. A lot of internet delivery stocks, internet commerce stocks very strong today. Roku up 8%. Amazon trading at 2,200, a new high. And it looks like some of the other FANG stocks, they used to call them, are getting ready to extend their rallies also.
How we doing on oil, Tim?
That's a great question. Oil had kind of a roller coaster day yesterday. It was initially down because a lot of people had been expecting a bigger production cut or hoping for a bigger production cut out of the OPEC plus countries. It came in at 10 million. I think even if they had cut 12 million, 13 million, or even 15 million at the high end, the only thing that's really going to get oil going for more than a 2 or 3 day rally is to get the economy started again, because there's just so much supply out there and you need you need economic activity, not just production cuts, to take a lot of that supply off the market.
All right. That's good stuff. All right. Let's get in, because I am seeing some comments and questions. Let's get into Wisconsin. All right. And before I do, I just want to have a little caveat here. All right. So I get these notices on Twitter. Okay. And I have to respond to this. I don't view my job as patting everyone on the head or giving them a little hit on the tush and telling them things are okay. I am brutally honest, and that is who I am and how I got my name. I will never sugarcoat stuff. And if I am being what you may think, what your point of view is negative, I would suggest taking it to heart, because sometimes losses are a great teacher. Okay. And so let me just get that out of the way. If you want someone to pat you on the head, there are a lot of self-affirmation shows out there, that you could follow. That's not what we do here. We try to objectively analyze data. All right. Now, that said, Wisconsin last night and what it means. And actually, it's not last night. It's April 7th. As usual, Tim, you got people who hate Donald Trump going out there and saying, this is a disaster for Donald Trump. He endorsed Daniel Kelly. And, this was a complete repudiation of Donald Trump. And they always just take it to the complete extreme. And then you have Trump supporters who, are quick to try to dismiss it. So as usual with politics, as in anything in life, the answer is somewhere usually in the middle, folks. Okay. It is not a good thing or something to dismiss for Republicans what happened last night, but it also is not the end of the world. So let's just get into it and talk about what happened and what I see. All right. So the liberal Jill Karofsky defeated the conservative incumbent Daniel Kelly in the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. That was the most hotly contested election statewide there. Now, we did have presidential primaries, one of them being competitive, which we'll talk about more, while the other one not being competitive. Wisconsin actually held its presidential primary and the statewide general elections on April 7th. The results were just reported today. What happened, if you folks remember, on April 6th, the Wisconsin Supreme Court overruled Democratic Governor Tony Evers, basically saying they had no choice, although it was a ideological decision, meaning 4 conservatives on the court, which is now not the margin anymore. 4 conservatives on the court voted to overrule. 2 voted to uphold his order, and he tried to unilaterally postpone the election, which honestly Republicans favored just doing in person, but the truth is the governor never did his job and picked up the phone to call the Republican legislature and try to hatch out a deal. Had Scott Walker been the governor, I guarantee this would not have been the drama that unfolded, even if he had a liberal legislature to deal with. Okay. Anyway, let's get into what we saw here. Okay. Also, Lisa Neubauer, who ran against Jim Hagedorn in 2019 for the Wisconsin Supreme Court, another very hotly contested election, and it came right after Republicans did poorly in Wisconsin in 2018. So it was a ray of sunshine for Republicans. Jim Hagedorn beat Lisa Neubauer. She ran for her seat again, which is the Court of Appeals District 2, and she won by a similar margin that Joe Karofsky won last night. It was a thumping. There's no doubt about it. It was probably, I think, with all the votes now counted, around an 8-point thumping. I mean, it was not a good night for Republicans. But Kenosha County really told it tells the story, but it's like the first part of the story. Karofsky carried, this is a very, very important swing county in Wisconsin. It is in the southeastern part of the state. They call them the Bow Wow area. Milwaukee is a Democratic stronghold. They're going to carry that county, and they're going to carry it by a huge margin. Also, their second stronghold is Dane County, and she did very well there as well. But out and around those areas, Racine, where Paul Ryan's from, those are where Republicans can run up their votes. Kenosha is the swing county down there. If Republicans want to win statewide, they have to at least fight it to a draw in Kenosha. And hopefully, if they're trying to win the state, it's a good indicator if they're carrying Kenosha. And that's true even if they're carrying it by a slim margin. Jim Hagedorn won Kenosha by about 4 points. He got about, I think, 13,000, 12,000 votes, something like that. Karofsky carried it against Kelly last night, or the 7th. We counted it last night, with about 58.5% of the vote, almost 59% of the vote. That was a very good showing. Now, Kelly ran behind Hagedorn across the board, and Washington, by the way, was his best county in 2019, and she ran almost 10 points behind. Now, here's where I'm going to put a little bit of a wrench in the Trump is finished crowd. This electorate was about half of a presidential electorate, Tim.
Right.
That's it. Okay, folks, it was no more could you draw from this electorate any inferences than you can from Jim Hagedorn's victory over Neubauer. All right. It's half of the electorate. Donald Trump won Kenosha County. He won it with 30-something thousand votes himself. Karofsky, who won, got just about a little bit, the entire electorate was a little bit more in total votes than the amount that voted for Hillary Clinton and Barack, and a little bit more than the amount that voted for Donald Trump. So when I tell you we're looking at half a picture here, we're looking at half a picture. That being said, Trempealeau, Jackson, Washington, these are areas where what we saw, and Kenosha too, but to a lesser extent, we didn't really see the liberal candidate Karofsky. We didn't really see her, piling up the votes, Tim, in a manner that would suggest that she won over, those swing votes. There was a clear indication, because there was a drop in conservative areas, that it's possible when we get all of the data in and I get more time to go over it, I'll be more confident saying this. But immediately what jumps out at me is that Democrats had a turnout edge. Some of that may be from the virus, because the virus is uniquely dangerous to older voters, who are the voters that make up the base of the Republican Party, people who are more at risk of developing a serious problem from the coronavirus, from COVID-19. That's number one. Number two, there was a competitive primary, a competitive Democratic primary. There was not on the Republican side. That being said, Donald Trump once again racked up a huge vote total for an incumbent president who is running unopposed. Tim, he got like 500,000 votes. Do you know how many Barack Obama got in 2012?
No idea.
Wisconsin? Less than 200,000. So what that says is that there is a die-hard base out there for this president who are going to vote. And we don't know what the other 50% of the electorate or plus that are going to come out in November that did not come out for the election on April 7th. We don't know yet what they're going to do. So again, what does Wisconsin mean? It is not a good sign for Republicans. It's not, you shouldn't be dismissing it if you're a Republican or conservative voter. It is foolish to ever dismiss a loss, ever. But it also is not the end all be all where Trump is finished and that is it. And I will say this on some of the polling because we got it also, Tim, Ohio Predictive Insights came out with a poll in Arizona. It is Biden +7. I can actually pop up. That's going to overlay Tim and I, but just to show you guys, because I want to make a comment about this real quick. Here is, I got to put it in front of us. The Ohio Predictive Insights poll. The trend is what I really want to get out to people right now. I'll have to overlay it. Give me 1 second, folks. But while I'm going to comment on this. The trend is always when a nominee becomes the presumptive nominee. Okay. The trend is always going to show that the presumptive nominee at the moment that he is considered the presumptive nominee, it is not at all uncommon for them to get a big bounce, is my point. And they're almost like Mitt Romney. There was a point when he became the presumptive nominee where people thought he may have a snowball's chance in hell against Barack Obama when it was never true, is my point. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible for Joe Biden to win. It absolutely is. And in a state like Arizona, he could really head off Donald Trump. I would like to show this to people to show them what they got. Here's the trend for Arizona with Ohio Predictive Insights. Not a terribly bad or inaccurate polling firm at all, guys. Now, that shows Biden leading more than he's not. I will say this, McSally was leading more than she was not in their polling going into 2018. Sinema eked it out. At the end, McSally took a 7-point lead and then lost it. I think their final was McSally +1, which was about where our model showed. There were some things that happened in Arizona that really should not have happened. And barring them, McSally would have won by about the amount our model suggested, which was anywhere from 0.4% to 1.5%. But Democrats played some games there, legal, but played some games, took advantage of the lack of uniformity in election law statewide, and Republicans did not. So and then of course she got walloped among independents when Donald Trump carried them. The problem for Trump in this poll is that he's not carrying Maricopa County. If he doesn't carry Maricopa County, he will lose the state of Arizona. There's no doubt about it. He won it by 5 points in 2016. McSally barely lost it and barely lost the state. So the importance of Maricopa cannot be understated. However, while this is of likely voters, like I've talked about a million times, I don't like when pollsters, Tim, push out these polls and don't tell us exactly how they came up with these likely voter models. I'm not questioning what's his name over there at all. That's not my point. My point is, if you look in the poll, Trump voters are statistically significant. It's the difference is significant. They are far more likely to vote than Biden voters if you look at their own numbers. So I'm wondering where they came up with 42% for Donald Trump in that state, because he would really have to get killed to lose that state by 7 points among independents. He carried them last time. He won Maricopa by 5 points. Biden, though, again, I will say he is at his high peak. I will pop in right now and just show people Arizona real quick and why it's competitive, and then we'll move on to Pennsylvania, because I don't want to kill Lisa out there. She's dying and been waiting for Pennsylvania. Here is the voter file for Arizona. You see 31%, 32% is a Democrat, about 35% is Republican. That's why when somebody like Donald Trump wins independence, it's usually like about a 7-point win in the state of Arizona. Biden has led in almost every poll in Arizona so far. He's going to get a widening out now if past this prologue, because he is at his high point. The presumptive nominee is at his high point. This right here is how Sinema won. She clobbered McSally among independents, Tim, and that has to change. This state is getting, it used to be ruby red, and it now is a battleground state. There's no doubt about it. I still view, despite the polls, I still viewed Trump to be a favorite here. All right. Or at least before. We'll have to see how the economy shakes out, but I still do. The problem he'll have if he doesn't win Arizona, Tim, is that he really needs to run the table in the Midwest. And as we went over in Michigan, and I'm going to show you in Pennsylvania today, right now, yeah, we have 15 minutes. There's time to get into it. It is not, you don't want to be put in that position, is what I'm saying. If you're any Republican candidate, you don't want to be put in a position where you absolutely have to win, everywhere in a traditional blue area. And again, this is why I am stressing that Minnesota has been neglected by Republicans for way too long. Donald Trump is the perfect candidate to flip the state of Minnesota for Republicans. They spent no money. They did nothing but one rally after I gave Larry that poll, and Larry gave it to
You got to think the Trump campaign is onto that, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Right. But I would be concerned about their bullishness and willingness to spend money in some of these states that I think they're fool's gold. New Mexico. This would, when we get some time, I'll throw New Mexico in the queue, Tim, just so people can see what I'm talking about, how it's fool's gold. Oh, that's right, folks. If you subscribe to PPD and you watch this show, or you do one or both, I forgot to tell you right now, as we speak, everything I show you is in this giant database of 150 million voters. And I can't do more than one or two states a day on this show, but we are going to put up a voter analysis map. So if you like looking at this stuff and you want to see what the voter files say for subscribers, you'll be able to go to an interactive map, tap on. We're going to start with the battlegrounds, Tim, just because it's so much information, and little by little we'll add different states for people to see, but we're going to start with those battlegrounds, and they'll be able to see all sorts of cool points, not just party, household income, like our basic defaults. We'll also do what's called a religiosity index. Okay. And someone's not only how religious they are, but what sect, I guess, a denomination, what faith they belong to, is a very strong indicator of how they're going to vote. And we're gonna have that up there too. I meant to get into that yesterday, but we got rolling, and then kind of lost. I kind of lost my train of thought to tell people, but it's going to be very cool when we do this. You'll be able to go back and say, what did Rich say on Tuesday? And if you subscribe, you'll be able to see it. So anyway, and I'll let you know when it's up. It will take some time. It did last time. We've done this before. We're just going to do it. It's going to have a lot more features this time. All right, so let's get into Pennsylvania. Let me bring this up so everybody can see it better. Tim and I are going to disappear for a minute here. This is a very difficult state for Republicans to win. If you go and look at voter registration, and that's why Donald Trump won it, because of crossover and his margin among independents. If you go and look at the crossover vote in a state like Pennsylvania, you'll see that adds up. If you look at the voter registration, Republicans have made significant gains since Mitt Romney lost it to Barack Obama by 4 points in 2012. They had actually made a number of gains up until that point, but it just kept going. Since then, Democrats have made a bounce back, okay? What I'm going to show you right now is if the entire electorate could vote, all right? What would be the bottom line for each party? Or what percentage of that would each party, even third parties, make up? So let's just run this right now, and then we'll get into it. And then I'll show you how Republicans can win and how Donald Trump did win it. And while this is running, let me go and look. And actually, I'll pull up the old polling we did in 2016, because it does show the feat. I mean, there's just, I mean, the what's the word I'm looking for, Tim? I mean, the feat, the accomplishment to win and run the table like he ran the table out there. It was really something, and that's why there are just so many people who.
I mean, he ran up just huge numbers,
Yeah.
huge numbers in
Western
rural areas,
yeah, oh yeah,
and in the Northeast, in the typical Rust Belt, blue collar areas that would typically have been Democratic, textbook Democrat voters that just had enough.
places like Luzerne County. You know what? Like Michigan, the Keystone State had not gone, like Tim was just saying.
A lot of similarities between those two states.
Very. And they have been traditionally just a few points away from each other, Tim. You know,
Yep.
Like Michigan, the Keystone State had, like Tim was saying, had not gone for a Republican on the presidential level since 1988. But unlike Michigan, and this is why I'm stressing this, because when I show you the party percentages, you're going to be shocked. No one can blame low voter turnout in Democratic strongholds like they did in Wayne County and other areas. They cannot blame that for Clinton's loss against Trump. Period. End of story. Pure and simple. In Philadelphia, she came out with more than 460,000 vote lead, which was down, from Obama's 480,000. And even he had like almost 500,000 vote lead coming out of there, Tim, in 2012. But in 2008, he got like 480,000 vote lead out of Philadelphia. He got almost 500 in 2012 against Romney, still only won it by about 4 points. But it wasn't due to turnout. That's my point.
Right.
It was not due to turnout. It was due to voter preference. She outperformed John Kerry in 2004, a year which he nearly lost the state to George W. Bush a few thousand points. Obama won 85.2% of the vote in 2012, and Clinton won 82.4% in 2016. It was voter preference. In Allegheny County, which includes Pittsburgh and its suburbs, she actually received a little less than Barack Obama, about 16,000 votes, but Trump basically flipped the rest of the state, which Barack Obama only lost to Mitt Romney by about 270,000 votes. Excluding Philadelphia and Allegheny counties, he clobbered Clinton by 640,000 votes. And we saw this all over the Rust Belt. He flipped counties that voted for Barack Obama in both 08 and 12. That includes Erie County, a county that voted for Barack Obama by 16 points. He flipped it by a narrow 2% margin, but 2%, that's an 18-point swing. So considering the demographics, it's likely that now in those areas, Donald Trump can hold those. Okay. It's those Philadelphia burbs that he really, I mean, I know what they say with Joe Biden, Tim. I get the argument. He's a white working class person. His record, and they said the same about Hillary Clinton. His actual political record does not suggest that. If you look at the polling Fox News just came out with, one of the worst polls on television going on out there. I mean, they have one of the worst track records. I will take the ABC Washington Post poll over the Fox poll any day. They have a much better track record, and that is saying something. All right. If you even look just in that Fox poll, there is no evidence that Biden will outperform Hillary Clinton among those voters. That's not it.
No.
Where Biden is going, if Biden wins, it will be because he took those voters everyone thought were going to go for Mrs. Clinton in places like Philadelphia County, moderate to even moderately Republican women in the burbs. He wound up winning white women in that category when most polls suggested he was going to narrowly lose them. And if people remember, if they can go back in their minds to the narrative the media was selling back then, Hillary Clinton was going to win those women, and Mitt Romney had won them. And without those, he can't win. I mean, just try to remember and picture it. And that's not what happened. He did better with these people than the polls ever suggested that he would. And then he ran it up everywhere else. So Appalachia is very important too in the state where I'm talking about, where he ran it up everywhere else. Counties in Pennsylvania that are classified as belonging to the Appalachia region represent 52 of the 67 total counties in the state. And it casts 44% of the vote, or it has. That's like the generally speaking. Right. So more than 4 in 10. Yes, a load of vote comes out of Pittsburgh and comes out of Philadelphia, but still more than 4 in 10. And last time, Tim, I think it was like 46% comes from counties that are classified as Appalachia region. Why does this matter? That's where these working class voters Tim was just talking about had traditionally been Democrats. That is where these voters are. And they voted for Donald Trump. They went so big for Trump, bigger than even our polling, which was very accurate. I'm going to show you that, guys. I'm going to show that to people soon, because this was the holy grail for a pollster. It was the holy grail, Tim. No pollster, ever wants to be wrong, but it is very rare when you are that close. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but toot. All right. And it was tens of percentage points off in a, state where there are millions and millions of votes. And I brought up, I'm going to drag this over, Tim, because I have what I showed them the other day, and then what I showed them the other day, and then what Epoch Times, when they were doing the interview with, we were doing the interview with the Epoch Times, put together, because they wanted the actual decimal point breakdown of where we came down on these things. All right, let's scooch down, and then I'm going to, and just to give you guys an idea, in Allegheny, it went, in those Appalachia counties, they went for Trump by about 500,000 votes, which is significantly more than Governor Romney got. It was about 176,000 out of those counties when he led Barack Obama in those counties by 176,000 votes. Donald Trump won it by about 500,000. All right. So let's scooch down now just to show you how hard it is and the feat this guy. This is the party breakdown. Democrats in this, if you were just casting and yes, I will concede, because I know where some people are going to go on this, Tim. The voter rolls in Pennsylvania are dirty. They're dirty, and they need to be cleaned up. They're not good. All right. A brief review found a huge number of people who really should not be on the rolls and eligible to vote. That is just true. But again, Trump, this is something Donald Trump was able to overcome. I don't want anybody ever to get hung up. Well, of course, we need election integrity is very important. You should not get hung up on this stuff. You really shouldn't. Fundamentals matter, and you could even with the cheating that goes on in Philadelphia, Tim, which is very well known. You could still win the state, which Donald Trump proved. Anyway, Democrats though have a significant out of the gate advantage. The deal is though they don't always. They're either not eligible or they don't go out and vote. They have very loose, what's the word I'm looking for? Registration over there, Tim. Like, how they, their registration efforts. Sometimes people will get registered and they'll just never vote. Right. And then Republicans are 39%, which is under 40. They're almost to 50. Republicans are under 40. I'm going to break this into a likely soon, but gender, 52%. Female, about 47.5% male. Very similar to the nation as a whole, a little bit more male, although pay attention to that when we do the voter propensity score, which is going to tell us what the changes are for this very wide net when we look at voters who are at least 50% likely to vote. All right. And then we have household income through the roof. I won't bore you guys with that, but I will go down here ethnicity, Pennsylvania is still a very white state. There's only about 3% of the vote there that's Hispanic. With the this category as unknown tends to be a lot of people who are Hispanic but identify as white. There's and then there are some that are just genuinely unknown, but for the most part, very low Asian population. African Americans play a very big role in the Philadelphia vote and Pittsburgh as well, but it's still an 8 and 10 white state roughly. And we're going to get into that. Maybe I'll bring up the exit polls too, because the crossover vote was just so important, and the voter model itself. And then it's 45% Protestant, which I was telling you about that map before. That's why we give that religiosity index. It's very cool. And you will see how much that really does matter. And Catholicism is still 20%. You have a lot of Irish, Tim, out there still. You have a lot of Italian, ethnic Catholics is where I'm going with this. Irish, Italian, and then there's even the small Hispanic population. They certainly contribute to that. This has been the case in Pennsylvania for a while, about average, sometimes even more than average nationally, that Catholics make up in the electorate in Pennsylvania. But again, still a predominantly Protestant, almost a majority, a strong plurality for the Protestant religion there. And why does this matter is where I'm going with this. When we come back, we'll do the voter propensity score. I'll pop this up again just so you guys remember. 47%. Democrats are almost to 50. And I'm going to show you, when you look at the records of that actually voted, the difference. All right, but it's 11 o'clock. Let me pop back in. We will get right back to Pennsylvania when we come back. All right. But let's do the spiel and then go to Tim for a market update. Okay. Again, if you are watching this on Periscope, follow the account you're watching it on, whether it's mine or PBD. Give us those hearts. All those hearts. We love those hearts. All of that matters. And if you are watching it on Facebook, if you haven't liked the page, like it. And then, of course, like the post. On YouTube, we are trying to hit that milestone. So if you haven't subscribed to YouTube yet, then make sure to subscribe. And if you want to be notified, hit that bell, okay? And give us those thumbs up. All those metrics matter to YouTube. Anyway, and then the ultimate way to support the show, of course, is to subscribe to PPD. You can go to ppdnews.us/subscribe. Okay, ppdnews.us/subscribe. All right, let's check the markets before we get back to Pennsylvania, because it's 11 o'clock and I want to know what's going on out there. What's happening, Tim?
Well, markets are off their highs a little bit. I mean, the Dow is up 450. It was up as much as 625 earlier. S&P, NASDAQ have also given, they're slightly off their highs. The S&P is still up 2.25%, and NASDAQ is up about 3%, but still a very strong day for the market if it can hold a good chunk of these gains going into the close. The only thing I would say is that the 200-day moving average for the NASDAQ is right at 8,400. I think holding it is going to be a battle as we get into the last few hours of the day. And I wouldn't be surprised to see some profit taking from people who were fortunate enough to get into the market during the last 3 weeks.
Right. And so we haven't had Cuomo's press conference either. And I did hear today he'll be talking more about, let me just check. He's going to come in what time? Probably 11, I think.
He's been coming in maybe around 11:30, somewhere between 11:15, 11:45.
Right. So he's not out yet.
A real hard schedule, but
let's keep an eye on that. I know the show probably might even miss that. If he comes out at noon like he did yesterday, I think it was about noon. But let's keep an eye on that, folks, when he does come out, because they're going to ask him about the reopening task force that him and the other governors, the Northeastern governors, Tim and I spoke about earlier in the show. That will, believe me, investors are going to be listening. They're going to have their ear glued to that to see what he says. Okay.
It's also worth mentioning there were a lot of bank earnings out today, and I didn't really talk about them because, frankly, I think most of the earnings season is just a moot point right now. Investors are clearly looking beyond first quarter earnings. They're even looking beyond second quarter earnings companies really just are, I think, at a loss of what kind of guidance to give, because everybody knows that the second quarter is just going to be a throwaway quarter. And anybody that has models out, whether they're single stock analysts with projections for the full year for 2020, or economists with their projections for GDP and employment for 2020, all of those are pretty much in the trash bin right now, because we know we're going to have, a very, very sharp decline at the end of the first quarter, and probably for at least the first half of the second quarter.
Right, right. And what are we going to have? Wells Fargo this week? We're going to have JP Morgan,
Well,
right?
They reported early
They did?
today.
Oh, they did, right,
JP
today.
Morgan
Yeah.
said,
That's what I thought, early in the morning.
We're looking at a very severe recession. But the question is, how fast can we come out of it? I
Right.
think you're going to have as much effort and energy and focus put into getting us to come out of the economic shutdown as you had battling the virus through mitigation, social distancing, and getting all of the right medical supplies and hospitals and medical workers ready to handle the outbreak.
All right. And this is a good way to segment back into Pennsylvania. Well, what we were talking about, I did see the comment about Biden with fracking. And if you guys remember what I was breaking it down by region before, how much of the vote lead Trump increased from Romney over those areas where energy matters, it was huge. Romney came out of there with 176,000 vote lead. Donald Trump won it by 500,000 votes. Those are the areas that are classified as Appalachian. Of course, we are talking about those areas. It will matter when you consider, and if again, we did this on PPD a while back. When was that? It was 2009, Tim, because we were looking at quarterly GDP from that year. But the increase from the Obama years to the Trump years, for instance, real GDP in Pennsylvania grew by 1.7% in the fourth quarter of 2016. For that entire year, it was only 1.1%. All right. And under Donald Trump, it first rose to 2.1. It rose 1.9 coming out of Obama's last quarter to 5.2 in the first quarter of 2019 under Donald Trump. That, of course, was completely driven by the energy boom, or at least the majority of it. You guys, if you have time, the article, I'll put it in the YouTube thing later. For anybody who wants to see it, but it actually is. It was titled for West Virginia, Tim, because West Virginia at that time led the nation in GDP ranking growth by state, but Pennsylvania was right there, and it really illustrates how energy policy under the Trump administration drove these resurgence of goods producing sectors in these states. So of course that absolutely will matter. Like I had said before, it will come down to whether Biden can take those suburbs, those voters, those white women in the suburbs who voted for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. I am not at all convinced that Joe Biden is going to do much better among those white working class voters than Hillary Clinton. That was supposed to be the case for Hillary Clinton as well. And what happened was she's made that comment. We're going to put a lot of coal miners out of a job. And we're going to put a lot of coal companies out of business. And then it snowballed from there, because that was not specifically speaking to all of Pennsylvania in that area, but it spoke of their sector, So anyway, let's get back into this and let's pull it back up. I'm going to share a few tables here, Tim. We'll go back to the voter file. I want to remind people really quick about the partisan breakdown. Then let's add the voter propensity score and look at how much Trump won this state by. Okay. and it give everybody a much better idea of how. I mean, it's a heavy lift. Pennsylvania is a very heavy lift for Republicans, but Trump isn't a normal Republican. And if, like you were saying with the economy before, if it does bounce back, then that it's a different ball game. So let's pull it up. Give really quickly. I'm going to refresh your memory. I did not add the voter propensity score yet, and we will in a second. But I want to show you again. Look at Democrats, how they start out with a wealth of voters, far more than Republicans, even though Republicans made significant gains. I mean, the Democrats are right there, almost to a bare majority, just from that. All right. But then we'll add the voter propensity score, and you will see the change. And let's just do general elections because we're talking about a general election. I'm going to say they're at least 50% likely to vote. All right. That is ballpark. Standard. So we're going to redo this puppy. And now you're going to see an electorate that looks a lot closer to the electorate in 2016. Democrats only came down a hair, but Republicans jumped all the way up to over 44%. Okay. Why does this matter? I'm going to get rid of this screen. Let's look at the exit polls first, Tim. Okay. Let's look at the exit polls first, and you're going to see why it matters. The energy policy does matter. So people say, this stuff is anecdotal. It's not anecdotal. This is how Donald Trump increased his vote out there in the Republican-rich areas from Mitt Romney's 176,000 to 500,000 votes. I mean, it's not anecdotal at all. And Biden's whole argument, of course, is that he will win over these working class voters. I don't see it. Exit polls, I do want people to remember how I feel about exit polls, Tim. They're adjusted later, of course, as always. The exit polls in 2016 showed Hillary Clinton was going to wipe the floor with Donald Trump. It was not even going to be close. It is what you're seeing here with how little the percentages of truly independent voters in Pennsylvania. That absolutely is true. I'm going to get rid of this, though, so I can pull up some other stuff. All right. I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to add some. I'm going to first show people what the exit polls said it was, and then what our polling showed it was, and how, because it really was about that crossover with these energy voters. It really was. All right. So here we go. I'll even full screen so you guys can see. If you can't see it, all right. Democrats were 47 or 40, almost 48 to a little bit, a little bit lower when we did the voter propensity score, and Republicans shot up to over 40%, 44%. The exit polls in 2016, after they were adjusted and to reflect the electorate, only was D plus 3. It was 42, 39, 20. It is absolutely the case that independents make up about 20% of the vote out there, sometimes less. So you have got to win crossover support in the state of Pennsylvania. If you are a Republican candidate and you want to win that state, you have got to win crossover. And we saw that in places like Erie County. Somebody brought that up before. Absolutely true. Luzerne County, another county that these are areas that supported Barack Obama and went for Donald Trump. Before we talked about I think we did talk about Erie, but Luzerne's a similar story. 18-point swings in some of those counties, like we talked about earlier. 16 points for Obama, 2 points for Trump. It doesn't sound like a lot, but you absolutely have to do this. I would contest these exit polls, Tim, that it was 11% or so. I just think that it probably was closer to where we had it. And I'm not saying it's a huge difference, but we had it around 13%. It probably may in reality have been 14, something. I mean, I know this sounds like small adjustments, but in the world of politics, when you win by this kind of margin, then that's what makes all of the difference. Trump won this state by about 40,000 votes. He won 48.2% of the vote to Hillary Clinton's 47.5. And I'm rounding in double decimals here. again, this isn't just to toot my horn here, but I want to show you ours to give you guys an understanding of why I think that crossover was a little higher. And also, here is the crossover. Here is our polling, the top line for our polling in 2016. This powered again the map. We had it as a tie because it was 48-48. We gave Trump 13% of the Democratic vote. We thought Democrats would be about 43% of the electorate, pretty close to the exit polls. Republicans would be about 37% of the electorate, again, very close to the exit polls. And independents would be about 20% of the electorate, again, very close to the exit polls. But the difference is that we gave him a bigger base of support among Democratic voters. And I want to show you the tens, breaking it down, the top line for the tens of percentage points, how close this was and why every single bit matters if you're trying to win a state like this. Okay, I'm going to refresh it. Here is Pennsylvania right here. Our actual top was 48.4, 47.8. That was the very last, with all of the last, all of the finals in. That's with all the responses that came in that Monday, that was the final when you added up our data set. And in the end, I mean, Clinton was up in the RCP average, Tim, by the way, by 1.9%. We came very close. And the reason, again, is that overlap, that crossover vote. I don't think it was 11%. I think I think they had the electorate breakdown just a little off, because you can't win those traditional Democratic areas, Tim. You can't swing Luzerne like that by Republicans alone and independents alone. You just can't. So I think the exit polls were just a hair off there. I really do. And in the end, there's just not enough independents. Look, you know what? Let's do this. Let's bring up the old map again. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time here, but let's bring up the old map and plot Pennsylvania. Okay. I mean, it's going to show you it's a heavy. Let's leave the voter propensity score on, because it gave us not a totally accurate picture of what the electorate was like in 2016, but a much more accurate picture. And let's show you where Biden has to win. Okay. Where Biden's got to bring this stuff back, where he's got to really kill it in order to flip this state. Because I'm going to show you where the media and everybody else, thinks that he's going to do better. I'm not convinced of that yet. I think in the end, Biden has to win, Tim, those suburban voters in the Philadelphia suburbs, because the state is just too red everywhere else. I really do. And that's where his vote is. That's where his vote is. This is what people aren't really coming to grips with. The media is telling us, folks, that Biden is going to do much better here. Okay? All around here. Now, if you remember the special election with Rick Sancone versus Connor Lamb, Lamb squeaked it out, polling Adam up by about 6 points. He squeaked it out because Westmoreland over here just did not come in as strong as it needed to for Rick Sancone. That is a Trump area.
And he was a terrible candidate.
He was a horrible candidate. Let's be honest. And in truth, he was down, depending on which polling you were looking at, he was down between 6 and 8 points over that weekend. You remember this, Tim.
Trump rally.
That rally for Donald Trump threw for him, brought some of those workers on board that didn't like him because he had a long history of being anti-union. Right. He's from the old guard Republican, the Romney kind of Republican. And they're not going to win a state like this. They're not even going to do well in some areas where Donald Trump did rock star well. Erie up over here, another area, you can see it. I mean, the partisans are shaded in here. And I'm doing that to show you, well, of course, Democrats have voters spread out all over the place. The concentration, of course, is in more urban Allegheny and Philadelphia. And then Donald Trump took this area and exacerbated what was already a trend. He took this area over here outside of Allegheny, exacerbated what was already a trend, and Erie, okay, which we talked about before. That was, again, Barack Obama did much better, I think, than the exit polls in 2012 gave him credit for among these voters. Barack Obama won Erie County, this area right here. He won it by 16 points.
Very economic.
I think Tim glitched out. He was going to say something. He will pop back in. But he won that. Barack Obama, during his reelection with Mitt Romney, won that area by 16 points. Tim, you back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
You glitched out for a second.
Erie County is tailor-made. I know I've that's happened a couple of times with my Wi-Fi.
Why don't you finish your thought? Because I want you to.
For a minute or two. Well, the Erie County is a very economically depressed area that just plays into Trump's strength very well, hit very hard by manufacturing going to Mexico and overseas. And also, I think probably bad opioid addiction problems up there also.
Yeah, and that plays in over here as well.
Yeah.
And by the way, over here as well, there's opioid problems in and around Mifflin, Juniata County. But like Tim was saying, these areas are basically tailor-made for somebody like Donald Trump. And if the economy rebounds, then Joe Biden's hopes to win back some of these voters is going to dwindle with it. I mean, that's just it. Until I see evidence to the contrary. My feeling, Tim, there are so many votes out here in this tiny little area called Philadelphia. Okay. There are so many votes there that I can see Joe Biden doing just so much better. And even, by the way, Bucks County, look at how red it is now. That was an area Mitt Romney thought he was going to do well in, and he really didn't. He just because that area, as conservative socially as they may be, that area is not an area that you would think a technocrat. What's the area? What's the word I'm looking for? That is not a plutocrat, probably better.
Establishment, old line establishment guy.
Right. And if Biden does do better here, I don't think it'll be because he won back a whole lot of that particular voter. All right. I think it'll be that he does better. And that's why I just checked this to change this to show you guys that tealish aqua color. These are voters unaffiliated. They don't represent a huge area, a huge percentage of the electorate, but they're where it counts, is my point. Out and around Allegheny in the burbs here. This includes, and Monroe. This is, we're going into Biden town, but if he's going to win back those white women that stunned everybody and voted 51%, for Donald Trump, 52% for Donald Trump, he's going to have to do it here. If he wants to do better in Bucks County, the southeastern part is his vote-rich area. Again, Donald Trump won these voters. He didn't even win them by a huge margin, Tim. Let's see. The exit polls had him winning by 7, 48-41. We had him winning it 48-40. So really close, by the way. Again, this is like Pennsylvania for us was I almost wanted to quit the day after this election, like a boxer who has a belt and you don't know when is too much. So you wind up stepping in the ring with that younger boxer who is just, more hungry and has an edge you don't know. And then he hits you on the chin and knocks you out. When I saw how close we were there, I mean, weeping like a baby, how close it was, so it was dead on. But we felt going into this, and the reason we leaned it to Trump is we felt a few things. One, the electorate was going to be ripe for him. And then two, that that crossover vote was basically Mitt Romney's target, Tim. He thought that he would get defections like that from Democrats who were just not happy with Obama's recovery. And that was not going to happen, but those were his targets. He was never really going to win independence by 8 points. It just wasn't, he won it nationally. He won independence nationally, I think, by 7. But if you go and look inside some of these states like Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, he did not do well enough in those specific states where they matter. Yeah. I mean, I'd agree. Somebody said Romney lost because he gave up. Tim mentioned it before. Trump fights. And people, whether you like his style or not, people don't follow leaders who don't have the courage of their own convictions to fight for what they believe in. If you go to a microphone and bring up Benghazi, and then the media, which, by the way, Romney was right about, and then the media scares you into a corner and you cower like Romney did every time, Crowley or somebody said something and defended Obama. If you cower like that, it is human nature almost. Forget about partisanship. Forget about data sets. Right, Tim?
I didn't quite get into this part of the rap earlier, but, the Republicans for decades have fallen for the trap that I'm going to be nice to the media and they'll treat me better. They won't.
No, it's not. That is such a fantasy of theirs.
Yes.
I completely agree.
Yes. They didn't treat John McCain well when he ran. They didn't treat Romney well. Now the media loves Romney. Why? Because he's an anti-Trump factor in the Republican Party.
And Tim, also too, don't you think they should have? Because I'd like to pop us back in here while we're having this discussion. Don't you think that Republicans should have won that lesson during the Richard Nixon administration? He vied, and in many ways, by the way, Trump reminds me of Nixon in his desire to be liked. Trump doesn't like that the media portrays him as somebody who doesn't like Hispanic people. Like that. It drives him crazy, and he wants to be liked. During Richard Nixon's administration, he was getting very good coverage. Thought he finally turned a page. He always wanted affirmation and approval from this group of society that he did not come from, and that did not like him, did not respect the accomplishments that he earned in his life. He did not have an easy, privileged life, Richard Nixon.
Right.
And he never got that respect that he deserved. And when he did the whole Nixon goes to China, the media for a moment, gave him due credit that he deserved. And he, like Tim said, it never for more than a fleeting moment are they going to ever accept Republican presidential candidates, Republican presidents, congressmen, whatever. If you do not agree with them, you will never be liked or respected by them. That's not who they are. And that's right. A lesson.
To me, the worst example of it was, even though Bush 43 won his reelection against John Kerry, and Kerry was just not a very good candidate. The media beat on him relentlessly.
Yeah.
During his second term, and he never pushed back.
Right.
Never pushed back. Right. Dana Perino will talk about it. Has talked about it many, many times. It was a very conscious decision that he was not going to go to war with the media. And you know what? They won. They won that. He would have been much well served to have pushed back, probably in a different way than Trump does, because Trump has his own personality. But I would just be screaming at the TV for him to push back at the media, and he would never do it.
Yeah, and like you said, I think it was the other day, but in 2008, not only what they did to John McCain, he was their favorite candidate when he ran against George Bush and lost
Right.
in 2000.
Right.
They basically went through the whole spiel that it was his turn and he was robbed by the Bush family. I mean,
Right.
they gave him glowing coverage. But also to come, by the time 2008 rolled around, you mentioned this the other day. You made a really good point. It was spot on. The bottom line is he was the worst candidate for that election cycle. He was total, he was a war hawk in a time when the nation had been
Right.
war weary. They were done. They were over Iraq. He
Yep.
was right about the troop surge, but it didn't matter at that point. It just didn't matter. He flatly told the American public the economy was not his strong suit.
Okay.
When
As soon
he
as he
said
said
that,
I think he's going to lose.
when he said that, the trust, if go back and look, folks, and maybe we could do something on that, Tim, but if you go back and look, they were about splitting that category, that issue concern. When you ask people, who do you trust more to handle the economy? McCain and Obama were about, up until that point, splitting that vote. McCain was dominating who you trust with foreign policy more, even though they didn't like his foreign policy, and they were done with war. And then Obama was killing him on healthcare, killing him. The minute he said, the economy's not my strong suit, he threw the election away. He threw it away. And that sometimes the Hollywood, how they rewrite history. Sarah Palin was the only chance he had to reinvigorate that campaign, and for a while there, he did get a nice bump. But in the end, they made it out. I don't know if you watched that, but Steve Schmidt's character makes it out like she did the campaign in, and that's ridiculous. In the end, a president, the top of a presidential ticket has got to carry themselves across the finish line. All right. Johnson didn't really help, being, in Texas. And that is the top cited case for vice presidential nominees. They are overrated. When you look at the actual data, they're grossly overrated by the media. But Sarah Palin did something for John McCain that he didn't have, which was bona fide credentials with the Republican base.
Right.
If people don't remember this, Rudy Giuliani was by far more well-liked and the favorite. He employed a bad campaign strategy, the Florida strategy, and he lost. But in truth, Rudy Giuliani, if you go, he had a big lead, Tim. You remember that?
Yep.
A big lead, not only in the Republican primary, but against potential matchups. Everyone thought it was going to be Hillary Clinton, not Barack Obama, by the way, back then, that early. And he was clobbering every potential Democratic candidate in a head-to-head matchup. Rudy would have won states that people hadn't won in years on his side. But politics is funny. And, 8 months, 7 months is a very long time. And events happen. Life comes at you fast, is my point. And the dynamics of a race can change in an instant based on that. If you would have polled Trump versus Biden during the impeachment debacle, Donald Trump would have ran the table. Now we're looking at a much more competitive race because of the economy. And it will matter how much this economy bounces back. And something else, Tim, totally unexpected could happen that nobody's even thinking of right now. There could be something that just, the coronavirus during impeachment was not on anybody's mind. And now it's the top issue. This is how life works. It could be something in an instant. I am a big picture fundamentals guy. Our model is a big picture model. Fundamentals win election. But events do dictate the narrative of elections, not news cycles. More like what Tim and I were just talking about. There's an economic calamity, and one of the leading party candidates says the economy is not a strong suit, and it's just a total. It's an X factor, is my point. All right, so it's 11:34. Let me go through it, Tim. And then we'll do the we'll take another quick look at the markets, and then I'll take some questions because I did see some questions. So you guys, you guys go ahead and think about which ones you want to answer. If I missed one, the Cuban one, Tim, don't let me forget about the Cuban. If I missed one before, then let me know and I'll do my best to answer them. So it's 11:34. You are watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit. Follow me on Twitter at Peoples_Pundit. And by the way, I didn't get that nickname from blowing smoke, folks. I'll always tell you what I firmly believe to be the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. Okay. And I'm joined by Tim, the Source Anderson. Follow him at TJ Anderson1 on Twitter. If you are viewing on Periscope, give us those hearts, guys. Rack them up and follow the account you are watching it on, whether it's mine or PPD's. YouTube viewers, we're trying to hit that milestone with likes. So like it yourself, share it with a friend, a like-minded friend, and tell them to like it as well. And if you want to know from now on, if you want to know when the show's going on, hit that notification bell, and that will send you a notification when the show goes live. From now on, because I've been listening to people, we're going to probably go 5 minutes before to give everybody time to get there. It will make it a lot easier if you do hit that notification bell. And of course, if you subscribe. So don't forget, if you are a YouTube watcher, to subscribe to YouTube. The ultimate way, of course, to support the show is to subscribe to PPD, which you can do at ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. All right. It is 11:36. Let's get back to Tim and see what the markets are doing. And then I will answer questions that you guys have. Let's try to keep it, something along the lines of what we talked about today, whether it's what happened in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. And then I will hit that Mark Cuban question. All right. But phrase it while I'm listening to Tim, phrase it in a way just to make sure I answer it, specifically how you want it answered. All right. But all the best, folks. I will see you in a few moments. Go ahead, Tim. What's going on?
So markets have had a pretty good 30 minutes since we went over them the last time. The Dow is up just about 400 points. The NASDAQ is holding the 8,400 level. That would be a big level for it to hold. The 200-day moving average is actually right at 83.98. So if the NASDAQ were to close above the 200-day moving average, that would probably be a headline that you will see later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. We're not there yet. A little over 4 hours to go. European markets have just closed. The Dow's up 1.75%. The S&P's up just over 2%. The NASDAQ's up almost 3%. And I just really fascinated to see how much of these gains we can hold into the end of the day. Trump is probably going to make some big announcements later today on what kind of a task force committee structure they're going to have on reopening the economy. And then we'll have to see if it gets a little bit of a sell on the news reaction tomorrow.
Right. Okay. And just, I may have missed it again, but because I was trying to read, but I'm focused on oil like a laser beam here for a reason. But we're just kind of in the same ballpark we were before.
Pretty much. I mean, it's I saw it earlier and it was up a little bit, but it's just not a big mover right now. I think that the whole thing with oil, I mentioned it earlier, you've got to get a timeline, a little bit more of a definition on when the economy is going to reopen and when we can start to get some real economic activity that takes some of this massive oversupply off the market.
Okay. All right. Let's get into, we got 20 minutes left. I mean, that goes so quickly. Let's get into some of these questions and let's do the Mark Cuban one first. So if you don't mind, I'm going to pop it up so everybody can see it. Okay, so Mark Cuban has been all over Fox News. Every chance he gets, Neil Cavuto puts him on. Cavuto hates Donald Trump. Or he doesn't hate him. He doesn't, I don't know what his personal feelings are, but he opposes the guy. He's a free trader. He hates tariffs, things like that. But in any event, Cuban has been toying with the idea of running for president. What's his chances as a Dem alternative to Biden or as a libertarian third party in a general election against the president? I will say this. I know there's a lot of talk, Tim, out there that Biden is going to be replaced. Interesting polling from now multiple pollsters, although Rasmussen was first, that Democrats would love Andrew Cuomo to replace Joe Biden as their candidate. He passed, much like, by the way, his father is probably well known for being a favorite to win at least the nomination, if not the presidency itself. And he decided not to run. And Andrew Cuomo decided, like his father, not to run. All right. I will say this. I do not think, unless barring something horrible happens to Joe Biden, or, I mean, Tim, he really deteriorates, because on this show, we are not going to pretend like this man is not lacking in mental capacity. The man has degenerated. I saw him the day he announced. He looked like he was a geriatric being held on by the arm, walking down a ramp built for wheelchairs. It was one of the saddest things I ever saw. I was like, how are they going to hide this? But barring,
did you see his conversation, his virtual conversation with Bernie yesterday?
Oh, and then the other one,
he was reading from a teleprompter. When's the last time you saw a conversation where one person was reading from a teleprompter?
And Bernie looked like he was going to cry. Bernie's such a sellout. For the second time, what a sellout, you know? Yeah. And by the way, his campaign managers, communications person, a bunch of people who are big Bernie supporters came out and said, I'm not voting for Joe Biden. Some said, I'm not going to at all. Others said that he would need serious, like his campaign manager, there would need to be serious, significant concessions that could hurt Biden in the general election. Right. So Biden's in a real bad place here. And if you look at a lot of these polls, they're assuming he's going to get all of that vote. And that is not true.
He's not going to.
He's not going to. If he wins, it'll be because he wins those independents by a strong enough margin. And maybe even some Republican women or something jump ship like they did on McSally in Arizona. That's the way it would have to be. All right, so to answer that, I don't think he's going to be replaced unless something happens to him, unless there's a really significant development with his health, mental or physical. All right. He will be the nominee to go against Donald Trump. His name will be on the ballot. Now, Mark Cuban, I think, is a lot of hot air. I mean, maybe you think otherwise, Tim, but
no, I don't.
I think that he is hot air. He's not running for anything, at least not now. And if he were to, I think his views are probably too liberal to run as a libertarian, but he wouldn't do anything that would jeopardize the Democrat chances to beat Donald Trump. Okay, so there are a lot of people out there who don't like Joe Biden at all. Mike Bloomberg, by the way, is another one who really did give some serious thought to running as an independent. Howard Schultz, okay? Yep. They don't want to do anything to hurt Biden. The polling was very clear. Howard Schultz would have taken a huge chunk of the Democratic vote. Too big to be competitive. It would have been a horrible landslide for them, and they are not going to do it. So Mark Cuban likes to talk a big talk. Maybe he's playing himself up in the future. There are a lot of rich people in this country who saw Donald Trump win and thought, I could do that. Tom Steyer's one of them. And they didn't. They missed the whole part, Tim, where he had a message. And it was the message for that moment. And he was the man to convey it.
You know, and the big difference is
they missed that
part.
A
lot of them discount this, and a lot of them would say, no, you're crazy. That's not the case. Donald Trump's been thinking about running for president for 30 years. Okay. None of these other people have. Mark Cuban has not been thinking about running for president.
That's right.
For 30 years. Tom Steyer was never thinking about running for president until he saw Donald Trump become president.
That's right.
Howard Schultz has never had any political aspirations in his life. Okay. Donald Trump was thinking about running for president in 1988.
Yeah. And on the Reform Party ticket several times.
Yes.
Which, by the way, with all this talk, oh, he's a racist, this and that. Donald Trump left the Reform Party because it started to associate itself with David Duke and other people that he didn't like. He was actually the New York Times quote of the day. Think about this. This is how much these people flip-flop and hope you're just too stupid to know. This is how little they think of you. He was the New York Times quote of the day he left the Reform Party, because he wrote his statement was that he's leaving the Reform Party because he doesn't tolerate racism, and that's it. Something along those lines.
Right.
The New York Times made him the quote of the day. Then he runs under the Republican banner, and they spend years trying to convince the public he's a racist. It's just, it's unbelievable. It really is. But they think very little of you, me, and Tim, and everybody else who's not part of their world. And they hope you're just, what they hope. And this answers another question about how is it this guy Biden is even competitive. There are so many people, and they thrive off of this hate that they created for Donald Trump. And that ties into we're a polarized country. Donald Trump's a polarizing figure. There's not too many people, since we've been polling the guy, who say they don't know or have no opinion of Donald Trump. You either do or you don't. And it's really fascinating. And they play, Tim, the media, they play off of this blind hatred. And it's really doing a lot of damage to our country. It really is, because they use that hate to blind people to facts, like the Russia hoax. Everybody knew it was a hoax, Tim. Everybody knew. They knew it was a hoax after they realized that their sources, which, by the way, Maggie, is that we all know was Adam Schiff. CNN, same thing. Every time he gets up, and that's why some of you have seen me call him Adam the bathroom leaker Schiff, because he would get up during the meetings and he'd go run to the bathroom. Next thing you know, it would be on CNN. It was unbelievable. It was so incredible. But after the dossier was reported by the Washington Post, which we knew was funded by Hillary Clinton and the DNC through Perkins Coie, that at that moment, they knew, those journalists knew, if they didn't already, that this was a hoax and they were being lied to. And yet they just continued to carry water. Maggie Haberman from the New York Times among them. One of the worst, by the way. I mean, she's just walking back. I was never told. My sources told me it wasn't. Oh, that's such a load. And if you were duped that badly, then at that moment, you should probably think, is it wise for me to believe these sources? But so instead of apologizing and saying, I'm sorry we misled the American people about something so serious, we accused a duly elected president of the United States from working with a foreign hostile dictator to undermine a U.S. election. We're sorry. Instead of doing that, they just cranked up the hate machine and kept going. And they use your hate to justify their actions. They use their hate to push their own agendas. And they use your hate to skirt responsibility and accountability. And unfortunately, the sad part is, Tim, they let them. And that answers some of that one question. Well, how is this? Everybody knows Biden has mental problems. He's not sharp. If you're voting for Joe Biden, you're not really voting for Joe Biden. That's a true reality. He himself admitted he would never make it to a second term. And there are a lot of people who think he'd never make it through his first term. So you better look at who he picks as vice president, because that's who's going to be president in 2 years. I have spoken with Democrats who say that, Tim. Democrats
right.
Who tell me Joe Biden will be president for 6 to 18 months. And then whoever he chooses for vice president will be president of the United States. I mean, there are Democrats who openly admit that. But again, there's a polarized country where we're not going to see electoral college landslides like Trump's and like Barack Obama's. Those are still possible because of how the electoral college is, but it's really not possible to see these giant Reagan like Johnson like Nixon like landslides. Not yet. If Republicans don't stop the demographic shift, they're going to be the victim of those kinds of landslides, years from now. But we're just not there yet, But that helps answer that question. I know to some people who don't support Biden and objectively look at it and say, is this a man that we really want to trust with the White House, barring everything else? just his condition. Well, that's why. I mean, the enthusiasm for Joe is so bad. It's lower than Hillary Clinton's. It's the worst level of enthusiasm in decades. Decades. But look at the primary last night. He still got votes. He still got votes because there are people out there, as much as they don't want to vote for Joe, they will vote against Donald Trump. My thought, though, on that, Tim, though, is you cannot win an election just by hate alone. And maybe I'll be proven wrong this time, but this was my argument to Republicans in 2012. Mitt Romney couldn't win an election on hate alone. You have to give somebody a reason to vote for you, you know? So look, I mean, somebody says, my boyfriend still believes it. Because the media, like I said, they rely on hate to do this. Because the media refused to apologize and concede that they were wrong, there are tons of people who still believe that Russia hoax. We polled Dana Rohrabacher out in California during 2018. Mike Bloomberg's money killed him. He could have won that race. Mike Bloomberg's money killed him because it targeted Republican women. And there were tons of Republican women who thought Dana Rohrabacher was a traitor. Outrageous. Just totally outrageous lie. But they never went back and said, I'm sorry. Look at the FISA footnote, Tim, just the other day. I had been telling people this was going to come out. Exculpatory evidence. Papadopoulos, Carter Page. It's not that they messed up. They had exculpatory evidence they hid from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And you would think somebody at MSNBC, somebody at CNN, somebody at NBC, somebody at ABC would bring on one of those talking head morons from Lawfare or one of those other disgraced rags to push them and hold them to account. Why did you come on our news outlet? Why did you come on our network on air and lie to our viewers? Nope. Didn't happen. So there's going to be people out there that absolutely still believe it. And unfortunately, that's why over here we call them the big media hate machine. That's what we call them because that's what they do, Tim. They crank out hate. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I'm right there with you. It's just a disinformation campaign. Now, I will say that in 2016, the Trump campaign did a masterful job at beating back on that narrative that was coming at him from all directions of the media. And I mean, I have no reason to believe that they can't do the same thing again. You know, they know what their risk is with suburban white women that didn't vote Republican in the 2018 midterms. Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot.
Oh, absolutely. And that's another thing. Remember when we were talking about before how all these election forecasters, some of them I may not respect, some of them I don't at all, but the Nate Silvers, the Crystal Balls, Kyle and Larry, but it seems to me, and this is why I got into this business to begin with, Republicans had history against them in 2018, just like Democrats did in 2010. All right. Hillary Clinton actually had history against her in 2016. But we forget these, what are very standard, very basic rules of thumb when it politically benefits us. And election forecasters, pollsters, everybody, media, they should not be doing this. You can show me where a preceding midterm election mirrored the electorate of the subsequent presidential election, then I will take a first-term incumbent midterm result at face value as a predictive indicator for the presidential election. You will never be able to find one. The only one who ever bucked the trend, or not ever, but one of the few to buck the trend, there's only been two in modern American history, was George W. Bush and Republicans after 9/11 in 2002.
Right.
And even that electorate didn't end up looking like the electorate in 2004. And about 3.5 million more voters voted, or Democrats, I believe, voted for, voted in that election with John Kerry than had voted in the Bush v. Gore election. The problem was they voted for George Bush. He won a
Right.
lot of Democrats.
Right. He
won a lot of Democrats. And again, though, it seems to me that these very basic rule of thumb, time-tested principles and rules of law in this business just get thrown out the window. A midterm election does not serve as a predictive indicator for the subsequent
look at Obama,
presidential
2010. That's probably
election.
the best example.
And exactly right. And Tim, if it did, then it would be bad news for Democrats, not good news. And here's why. In the House of Representatives, this is a blue wave. It was not a wave. A wave is both chambers, historically high number of seats in both. What happened in the House was an average result. They won 41, I think, at 45, 46 seats. The average number is about 38, right? Republicans won 60 something in 2010. And then in the Senate, had that shenanigan not gone on in Arizona, McSally would have won that state as well. And we would have been looking at the best first-term incumbent midterm president's party's performance since FDR. But instead, it was just the best since JFK.
Right.
So, if that midterm was predictive, it would not be a good indicator for Democrats because they did historically just below average, a little bit above average in the House, way below average in the Senate. And, so it's not something you should be touting is my point. That's my point.
So Rich, you started out the show talking about Wisconsin. The question that I would have to ask on Wisconsin is, why did the Republicans not say to the governor when he wanted to delay the election, delay it. Let's have it in 2 months.
I think
did they just completely underestimate how many of their voters would be disenfranchised and not go to the polls?
Yeah, last night, I will tell you, I spoke to a couple of people and they were surprised. They were surprised that it does appear that at least marginally, which marginally matters in a state like Wisconsin. That's how you win, on the margins.
Right.
They were surprised that their voters, because they view their voters as the reliable in-person vote. And they completely underestimated the impact that the virus would have on their psyche, Right. And we had some other examples, and in which case, I guess I could say I understand where they're coming from, Tim, but in Florida, for instance, Donald Trump still got a huge number of voters to go to the polls, even though it wasn't a contested primary. He did again in Wisconsin, but they made a serious tactical error. It is the governor's job to call the state legislature, even if it's a Republican one, and hammer out that deal. But they clearly underestimated that, and they were surprised. They were absolutely they were surprised.
And as unfortunate as it is to lose that state Supreme Court seat, I think the reality is. I bet 8 out of 10 registered voters in Wisconsin couldn't tell you more than one or two names of one or two people that are on the state Supreme Court. It's not going to be. I just don't think it's when November comes around, this election's going to be meaningless. Maybe the positive would be it would get Republicans to make sure that they've got to get the Scott Walker get out the vote machine cranked up.
And I think it's pretty clear where too. So when we went over that, remember we went over the voter file in Wisconsin not long ago on the show. I told people those independents swing. They are swingy. And if you don't get yours to the polls, and that's where Democrats are benefiting in some of these races, Tim.
Yeah.
they're having contested elections, and they're
Right.
having the Republicans are not. So what
They're having a
happens
contested
during
primary.
that's right. So what happens during these times is that not only do your voters not come out, but no, I'm talking about partisans,
Right.
but also those independents that lean toward you also don't come out either.
Right.
So it blows up that number. It inflates that margin that Empower Party has. Oh wow, we got 10 seconds. Yeah, folks. Again, this was time flew by. We're having a great time here. I got to be honest with you guys. I can't thank you enough for showing up and watching. You guys are giving us some good numbers. Again, if you are on YouTube, don't forget to like us, give us the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and we're almost to that next metric. We're trying to get there, and you can follow Tim Anderson on Twitter at TJ Anderson1, and me. You know where to find me at Peoples_Pundit. If you're on Facebook, like the page if you haven't already, and if you're on Periscope, follow whichever account or both that you're on and give us those hearts. All of that stuff matters. And as usual, you really want to support the show. We got some really cool stuff coming. Really want to support the show. Subscribe to PPD by going to ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. We will see you back here at 10 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. And we're going to move into Minnesota and out into some of those other states that, maybe some people just don't have their eye on. But all the best, folks. We will see you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m.